Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of the Sunday Night SitDown. I am your host, Miracle Jones, and today we have a special guest who is joining us, who's running in the Congressional District to represent Pennsylvania to replace retiring Congressman Mike Doyle. As you know, the Sunday Night Sit Down is a chance for us to sit and have a conversation with people who are running for office and decision makers in a more relaxed, formal setting so we can get to know them a little bit better. And with that, please welcome to the program Congressional Candidate Summer Lee.
Hey, y'all.
Hello, and thank you so much for coming back. Previously you joined us to talk about some of the things that are going on in Harrisburg, and now you are here officially as a candidate. You're running for Congress. So can you just talk a little bit about what unique qualities that you have that you are bringing to the race?
I love it. Miracle's like, let's just hop right into it. No, but yeah, unique qualities that I offer to the race where I think there are a number of them. I think obviously there's one in particular that's obvious, right? I'm a Black woman. And I'm the only Black woman who is running in this race. I'm the only Black woman who I believe is running in Pennsylvania. And we've never had a Black woman who served our congressional delegation from Pennsylvania. So that is, I would say, a unique intersection that I occupy. And it's the foundation of all of my governance. It's the foundation of my organizing work and how I move, that perspective that I bring, having grown up in the Mon Valley, having grown up, in a poor working class, Black neighborhood with a single mom, the experiences there. I think that has been the thing that sets me apart from all of my opponents, not just in this race, but in my state house race. But even now, I'm also the only person who has legislative experience. I'm a second term state rep. And I think that my organizing background is probably the last thing, or one of the other things that just really sets me apart. It's how I really structure my governance. I believe in co-governance, organizing with people from the bottom up. That grassroots approach to policy making and to governing is how I think sets me apart from some of the others.
Thank you. And you're talking about some of your experience. Are there political or even organizing figureheads that you look up to, people you draw inspiration from as you're going out and campaigning?
You know what? That's always one of the funniest questions I get. Like, people ask me that, particularly like, well, who are your political, inspirations? And honestly, I don't have any political inspirations. Not I would say intimately, right? I didn't really grow up in politics, and I didn't grow up steeped in politics and around it. So even as I recognize trailblazers, Shirley Chisholm, or even going further back to, political revolutionaries like Toussaint Louverture, in Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, right? I can see those folks as trailblazers who I believe are inspirational. But when I think about who inspires me the most, who inspires the work that I do, I think more about not individuals and so much movement organizations and spaces, right? I draw most of my inspiration from, really, like I said, the grassroots, right? Those folks who come out, right, who are being politicized through their lived experiences, right? These are moms and nurses and workers, activists and organizers who come out when duty calls, right? When things are happening in our communities, they stand in the gap for us. I think that's where I draw my inspiration. So the movement for Black Lives, right, our civil rights movements, revolutionaries, Huey P. Newton and Malcolm X. Those are folks who I've always kind of drawn inspiration to. And even as they weren't explicitly political, I find their work to have been steeped in the political.
No, thank you so much for that. And talking about political, you're running this race to replace, Congressman Mike Doyle. Can you just talk about what motivated you to run for office this time around?
So obviously, when I first got in 2018, I was running because I believed that there were rarely people who came from neighborhoods like me, who navigated life like me and my neighbors and walked like us and talked like us and had experiences like us. And I think that that lack of perspective in the halls of power is one of the reasons why inequality and racism are exacerbated, why they persist. So I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to start to really bring attention to how I believe that that racism and inequality are cyclical. When I think about the opportunity that we have here with this congressional race, this is the first time in 26 years that we have an open seat. And over the last 4 years since I first ran, I didn't just stop with my own race. I recognize that, if we're really going to win power for poor and working class people, for Black and brown people, right, we have to build power up and down the ballot. We have to build it in and out of election cycles. We have to build it not just electorally, but we also have to build that social power, that economic power. And I think that those are all connected. So when I think about this congressional opportunity, this is, of course, growing everything that we've done to scale. So all the races that we've run, from our state house races to the mayor race last term, and the judicial races, magistrate races, right? All of that, I believe, has been building up a drumbeat, right? We've been building momentum. We've been shifting the way that we do politics in this region, really changing the political landscape. Folks who do politics now recognize that what it means to be progressive is expanded, right? Progressive isn't just your policies. It isn't just saying that you believe in, clean air and clean water. It's not just saying you believe in, criminal justice reform or housing, but really it's showing that we can do politics in a different way. I believe that these are organizing opportunities. We're going to have to bring in more people. If we're going to win on Medicare for all, if we're going to win on racial justice, if we're going to win on a living wage and unions, if we're going to build a more reflective labor movement, right? That's more reflective of our workforce, with Black and brown folks, with Native folks, with people of all genders. We're going to have to build movements from the outside. We're going to have to organize people. We're going to have to expand the electorate. That's how we've always approached campaigning. I think that that's what we need to do right now. But also, I think that the thing that motivated me to run is recognizing that there is a certain urgency that you have when you have lived experiences, when you live in communities that are divested, when you live through injustice every day, when you see racial injustice and experience it in real time, right? As we're navigating COVID-19, as we're navigating, economic depressions, global crises, Black and brown communities are usually the hardest hit, the first hit, but we're the last to get into office. We're the last people who are in these rooms that are making decisions. And that lack of urgency is so evident when we see what gets thrown away first, right? Whose priorities get tossed away when the negotiation happens, right? When it's time for that bipartisanship and that civility, right? It's always issues impacting poor folks, Black and brown folks, that gets thrown by the wayside. We need people who have that urgency because they live it every day. So that's really why I thought that this was an imperfect opportunity. That's why I think it's important to keep on running, to keep on organizing, to keep on building.
Okay, and staying on the theme of keeping on, the Pennsylvania has had an unprecedented, election cycle. We've had, because of the changes in our population and just the, how the laws work, a change in our electoral maps. And obviously, when the maps came out, not only was your house left out of the district, your mother's house as well, which would have been a house that kept you registered in district. Can you just talk about why you're still staying in the race and how you are connecting with the people in the district just, 8 doors down?
Yeah, right. So it's five. It's like 5 doors out of the district. I'm like literally the line. And it's so funny because, it really brings to mind, or I think it really brings to the forefront conversations about what is a community? What is a community of interest? Obviously, the redistricting process happens every 10 years. And this is a longer conversation, right? We should do a whole conversation about gerrymandering, about the census, right? About how we're undercounting Black and brown and indigenous folks in indigenous communities. I just read an article that said that 18.8 million Americans were not captured in the census, mostly Black and brown and indigenous. And that's persistent, right? That happens time and time again. And the way that impacts us is that it keeps us from being able to build political power. But I think that we have to really recognize that gerrymandering isn't just Democrats versus Republicans, right? It's not just a thing that the parties do to each other. I think that we really have to get serious about racial gerrymandering, about the ways in which leftists progressives, urban-centered voters who are more likely to be Black and brown, who are more likely to come from immigrant populations, from refugee populations. Every time we go to build power, right, that 10-year mark hits and we see new maps that just real cleverly or very neatly, shift us around or cut us out. And I think we see that with this redistricting process. It's obviously obvious, right, what happened with me. We can say it's a coincidence. We can look at the map and we can draw whatever conclusion we want. But I want to really impress that it's not about me at all. It's not just independently about me. Because when we think about gentrification, when we think about overdevelopment in Pittsburgh, when we think about the many reasons why we've been losing Black population from the city of Pittsburgh itself, and then when we think about where that growth has gone, right? Those are Black folks who have been displaced from East Liberty. They've been displaced from gentrifying communities. They've found themselves in the Mon Valley and Swissvale, my community, right? In Wilkinsburg and Penn Hills. Those are communities with large growing Black populations, but they're also communities that have now been used as political pawns, right? They took our communities that probably needed intentional representation, and instead said that you won't get representation at all, that will use you because of your Democratic registration, right? Because we are the bluest areas. We'll use you for that, and so that you can help support a district that will never represent you, right? So now we have those Black communities, those communities that need intentional investment in the eastern suburbs, in the Mon Valley, right? And now they're going to be the anchor on a district, right, that will always be a toss-up, in a district that will always attract Republicans who are probably more inclined to operate in white supremacy, right? To ignore the needs of marginalized people. They're never going to come to Wilkinsburg. They're never going to come to Penn Hills. So I think that is my bigger problem about these maps. But at the end of the day, it's still an opportunity. The city is still kept intact. Democrats wanted to split the city of Pittsburgh. And I definitely was one of the folks who fought back against that, because we can't keep saying that we value Black voters, that we value progressives, we value liberals, and then continuing to ask us to sacrifice our own representation so that we can help the party keep a majority.
And you're talking a lot about like the way the power, works and operates, and you have gained some experience, as a state representative. Can you just talk about how you can parlay that experience to Congress with some of the things that you've fought for in the past around like environmental situations and like racial equality and justice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been in the state legislature. I mean, it feels like a short amount of time. It's been 2 terms. At the end of November, I'll have served for 4 years, and it's definitely been an eye-opening experience. I don't think that I was shocked by a lot of things, but I think that a lot was confirmed to me about how this process works. Even how Democrats and Republicans who are more traditional, right, the establishment folks, more conservative Dems, oftentimes they feel like there's more in common that they have with, the other side of the aisle than they have with the new kind of base that is kind of emerging in our new political revolution, right? In our new political movement, as we're seeing more Black folks and brown folks, progressives, leftists who are getting into office, right? We're starting to see a tension in some of the things that our government says it should be fighting for. So when we're talking about, for instance, environmental justice, right? Environmental racism, as you mentioned, what I've realized is that both parties, and at one point in time, right, environmentalism was bipartisan. It wasn't the pushback that we're seeing today. But even now, as even as Democrats say that they believe in climate science, right, trust the science, they're a party of science. But when we're talking about environmental racism and racialized capitalism and how those interplay, that push and pull between those two things, right, there's always like an unwillingness to move. Sometimes, right, there's a neutrality. And I think that what I've learned in my time in the legislature, by working with Democrats, by working with Republicans, by seeing how they move, recognizing that neutrality in practice, even while you are affirmative in your words, isn't enough for this crisis, right? It's not enough for this moment. We have to push Democrats. We have to push them and encourage them to be their more courageous selves, right? We need to really move them along and really force them to be bolder, but also those perspectives. I've experienced in my time, right, things that even Democrats will vote for, right? Bills that sound good, but if you get underneath the surface, you realize that they would have a disparate impact on Black folks, a disparate impact on poor communities. And just by being in those spaces, by sounding the alarm on them, we're starting to see Democrats and Republicans start to attack these differently, start to look at them differently. I've seen my caucus move move the needle, right? It's not big change, but more. When I first got in, 2018, we had a large contingent of our caucus that voted for mandatory minimums, voted for mass incarceration, voted for sentence enhancements, right? And we're seeing them do that less because of the advocacy that we brought to Harrisburg, because of the ways that we move the organizing. The same with environmentalism. We see them move differently when they start to talk now and have to interact with people who come from communities that are poisoned, come from communities with poor air quality, right? We're seeing them move differently because of our existence, because of our organizing, because of our advocacy. It works. That's the same approach that I plan to take to Congress, right? I have experience working with these Republicans, and we can pretend that they are something that they are not. We can pretend that if we just are nicer to them, if we just reach across the aisle with them, that they're going to come and they're going to work with us. It's not true. I assure you, it's not true. I work with Republicans who will not move Democratic bills. They promise to not move it. They promise to not work with leftists, with progressives. The way to fight that is not to give in to them. It's not to say, oh, well, they won, we're just going to do it their way. No, it's to push. It's to organize. It's to get them out of there. It's to replace them. And that's how I approach Congress. And that's what I learned from my time in the State House.
Thank you for that. And I know at the top of the hour, you talked about being one of the few Black women candidates in Pennsylvania. We know right now that there is, racial disparities impacting the health of Black women, especially around maternal mortality. Here in Pittsburgh, the infamous study. What are some of the ways that you feel that you could advocate for racial and gender equity as a congressperson that you cannot as a state rep?
Oh my goodness. I think it's like many-fold, right? First of all, it's important to just acknowledge that the federal level is bigger, right? Federal level, obviously, we live in a country with a system of federalism. There are states' rights, and then there are federal rights. And then also we know that the federal government is the end all be all, right? So even where we have states, particularly states like ours, right, where we're one governor away from really dangerous, right, really harmful policies that will be enacted. The federal level is always the way to remedy that, right? If we have stronger federal policies, if we have different appropriations, right, we can start to mitigate some of the things that the state is not able to do or unwilling to do. And I think that that's kind of baseline how we think about it, right? The second thing is what can you do at the federal level that we can't do at the state level? Well, first of all, we don't have any Black women at the federal level. There are no Black women. There has never been a Black woman. And there's also only one Black member of the congressional delegation from Pennsylvania right now at all, Dwight Evans, right? He is the only Black member that we have in Congress, the only person who comes from a Black community, the only one who is able to share lived experience as being Black, as dealing with inequality. So that in and of itself is important, right? The absence of Black voices, of Black perspectives, right, is damaging to us, right? It is a form of violence that we have to address. We talk about how representation isn't going to save us, but I can tell you that not having representation is harming us also, right? There is a harm reduction in it that we must do. So when I think about the Black maternal mortality rate, or that we have in Pittsburgh, right, that we see here in stark relief, right? When I think about the inequality that we see for Black folks that report told us about or reminded us of, right? I think about the lack of appropriations, right? I think about who are our stakeholders when legislators are creating policies. Who are they going to when they start to craft that legislation? Whose experiences are they drawing from? As we're talking about housing justice, right? As we're talking about environmental justice or transportation justice, titles are not the only thing that qualifies somebody to have an opinion, are not the only things that qualify somebody in their expertise. Our lived experiences are our expertise. So as we're thinking about the congressional level and we're thinking about who we're bringing in, who we're working with every day, who we are taking advice from and counsel from, right? Who we are consulting when we're crafting legislation, when we are fighting for budgets, right? And budget appropriations, right? We need those voices of community members, of Black and brown folks, of movement communities, right? And I believe that that is one approach that I bring, right? As a Black woman, as a Black legislator at the state level, that I'll bring to the federal level also. And actually, I'm gonna let you go to. I'm gonna let's. I don't want to take up too much time because I can just go on that one for so much longer, and
Gotcha.
I'm gonna as we go, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate the passion. And I know like recently there was, the hearing about, our bridges like here in Pittsburgh, and there is this whole wider conversation about gentrification in the area and infrastructure and rebuilding and what it means to have safe communities. But there's also like a fear of that being brought in on the backs of fracking, on the backs of like industry. So as you're someone who is in the realm of a stakeholder or decision maker, how do you wrestle with those tensions, and how do you make sure that we can have safe communities without having industries that harm us but also boosting the economy?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest struggles that I've experienced as a legislator, and as a legislator who has been committed to not always taking the easy vote or taking the easy approach, but really being committed to diving underneath the surface, right? As somebody from the Mon Valley, somebody from Braddock, right? I think our community is a prime example of what happens when you live in a divested community, right? That over relied on one single industry, in a single industry that also happens to contribute to air quality, to poor air quality, right? Contribute, to our climate crisis. And as a community that is now overwhelmingly Black, right? It's communities like ours that are always forced to make really difficult decisions, right? That are forced to make impossible decisions. You have to choose between your health or choose between your economic, relief, economic prosperity, which actually doesn't really come. And even as we're looking at those jobs that come into the community, right, we're still grappling with the fact that rarely are those jobs being filled by people in our community, right? So we're in this kind of catch-22, right? We're in this cycle that continues on. And what we are seeing are communities like ours that aren't allowed to think about the economies of the future, right? And it's been the biggest tension that I've experienced as a legislator, as somebody who consistently speaks up about environmental racism, who consistently brings to the forefront the voices of community members who understand the importance of jobs, but also would like to be able to breathe, right? Also, are living with COPD, living with asthma, living with cancer, living in communities that are blighted, right? Living in communities that are divested, and are urging us to be more innovative, right? Urging us to be more courageous in our leadership. I always talk about how our leadership has to juggle multiple things, but we can't say that we only care about jobs, and we do, and not say that we also want to juggle frontline communities, also need to juggle the prosperity, not just economic, but health, right? But mental, emotional, social, of communities that are on the front lines. We have to do both, and we can. I advocate for a Green New Deal and environmental justice that centers not just environmental concerns, but absolutely the science, right? When we look at the urgency of the crisis, we also have to juggle the needs of our frontline communities. Black and brown folks and poor folks are more likely to live in communities with environmental hazards. Braddock, Mon Valley, right? Those communities, prime examples, but also labor, because they do have a stake in this. And we do need to forge a pathway forward with our labor community in the room, right? Helping to form what is our just transition going to look like. We cannot have those conversations without them. We need leadership. We need people who recognize that all of those stakes are important, that we have to come up with a future that is inevitable, a sustainable future that balances the needs of our economy, that balances the needs of Black and brown and frontline communities, that balances the need of our environmental moment, because it's inevitable that we have to transition. It's inevitable that our economies are going to change. What we do now is the difference between choosing to bury our heads in the sand, taking the easy vote, right? Not getting the negative attention of labor, right? Or of politicians who are afraid of upsetting our friends in labor, or doing the thing that is actually friendship to labor and preparing for the future, right? Preparing for that transition. That's how I've always approached this. That's what I think is needed. And I think that road is going to come through Pittsburgh. A Green New Deal will run through Western Pennsylvania. Our community is at the center, the epicenter of our labor movement and our environmental crisis and movement. So that's what this campaign is about. We can't ignore these conversations. We can't ignore the people who are suffering, and we can't ignore the folks who are afraid of losing their economic stability either. But we do have to address it head on.
And you're talking about having these conversations, and we've also noticed that with people becoming more comfortable talking politically, there is this pushback, right? There are people who don't want to talk about Black issues, gay issues, queer issues, trans issues, immigrant issues. So, how are you dealing with the backlash?
Mhm.
And how are, as we see right now, we have some of the most diverse candidates running, Commonwealth wide. How are there like group chats that y'all are all talking to each other to like encourage other, not saying endorsements, I'm not trying to get you in trouble,
No.
but like how has that pushback been?
Yeah. When I first ran in 2018, I had one vow, like I made one promise to myself, right? I would only run if I could run as me, as I can run as me holistically, right? I'm Black. I'm from, a poor Black round. I don't want to code switch. I'm going to talk about race. We talk about kitchen table issues. Well, at my kitchen table, we talked about racism. We talk about white supremacy. We talk about environmental injustice, right? We talk about those things. And I was committed, and I really truly believe that our communities, our Commonwealth, our county, right? Even as we look at the racial inequities here, I truly believe that our voters were ready to have those conversations. They were ready to have them up front. And I think that too often politicians were treating us constituents with kid gloves, right? When I was knocking on doors, I'm in a district right now that's majority white, it's majority suburban. And every single door we knocked on, we talked about environmental racism. We talked about the racial inequality in our school funding and our transportation and housing, right? We talked about economic injustice. We talked about poverty. We talked about LGBTQ issues, right? We talked about issues facing sex workers and issues facing other marginalized people. And we talked about it head on. And where there is tension, there's growth, there's room for growth, there are opportunities. And sometimes, in the beginning of doing that, right, we would get people who would really be curious, right? They were shocked that somebody asking them for a vote would be willing to talk about that. But as soon as they really thought about it, they also had things to say, right? They also wanted to share. They also cared about it, right? So that's how we were able to build. And it's how I believe we've been able to start to change the political landscape here in Allegheny County. I will say that it comes with like growing pains, right? Because I talk about racial injustice and police violence, right? Because I'm, in marches and in protests for against police violence, right? I get folks who are already doing push polls into the community about me being a radical, right? About me being soft on crime, right? They're going to try it. They're going to do all of those things, but we know that it's making us stronger, right? We know that folks are starting to be able to see through that because of the movement, because of that organizing work. So we kind of just have to lean into it. It's always going to be tense, right? Talking about racism in America is always going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but if we are always running from uncomfortable conversations, how are we going to solve racial inequality? And as we're seeing more candidates, I see people even right now who are like, oh my goodness, like, what do we do? There are too many progressives running for things, or too many Black people running for things. No, let's shift these paradigms. We have congressional candidates now who are Black, right? Who are running as progressives, who are running in line with movements. We have them running in Senate races. We have them running in judicial races. We have them running all across this Commonwealth in ways that we were never able to do before. Now, we don't have to be friends, but we should never be down in each other, right? We should always be trying to lift us up so that more Black folks are realizing that there's space for us in this system, and that if we're going to dismantle these systems, that we only can do it by being intentional about it. So we don't want to do things that are going to make Black folks not want to run, make progressives not want to run. We want to say, look, there's room for all of us. I don't want to be the only Black face here, right? I'm not running just to be the first Black woman. I'm running for the second Black woman and the third one, right? And that's the work that we have to do intentionally here in Pennsylvania, right? Here in a state that, and in a city that doesn't have that many Black folks, but we do have power. We have power as a block, and we have interest, and they deserve to be centered too.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that that is something that people always wrestle with of when should I run? Can I run? Does somebody else deserve, to run first? So I think that there's a
Mhm.
lot of tension, and it's always great to see like competition and more ideas being like adopted. And as we like wrap up, you're you're doing the campaign. Has there been anything that has surprised you? With this campaign, like outside of the maps, obviously. But has there been anything that has surprised you? Any newer issues that you see like on the horizon that you're very like interested to tackle and to engage on?
The longer you're in politics, I feel like the less that surprises you. Honestly, I'm still fighting for the same things that I was fighting for when I was, a 29-year-old running for state rep. Those issues are persistent. Like when we're talking about cyclical racism, when we're talking about environmental justice and economic rights and workers' rights, right? Those are persistent struggles. They will never end. We will always be fighting for equality. We will always be fighting for equity. I would say the things that are surprising me, maybe in a positive way, or I would say our workers movement across the country, right? We're seeing workers because of COVID-19, because of poor working conditions, right? Because they're fed up with the fact that we're not raising the wage nationally and in our state, right? We're seeing workers take a stand all over. And I think that is so powerful. I think it's so inspiring, right? And I think that it's so important that we seize on that, because our electoral movement, our social movements, and our labor movements have to work hand in hand. If we're going to win paid sick leave, right? If we're going to win workers' protections on a job, if we're going to tackle, billionaires who are never being taxed, right? If we're going to deal with Medicare for all and educational equity, right? We have to have a robust electoral movement. We have to have a robust labor movement. So seeing our labor movement start to pick up, right? United States has amongst the lowest rates of unionism, right? We're at historic lows. So we have a lot of work and a lot of ground to kind of pick up, right? So we've been seeing all over the city, our coffee tree workers, our Starbucks workers, right? Fighting for unions and winning. We've been seeing Kellogg workers in Lancaster, teachers going on strike. We're seeing our workers movement picking up all over the country, and we're seeing solidarity in ways that we haven't seen in some time. I don't want to say it's surprising. It's so much as it's encouraging. I think it's something that's worth building on, right? In this cycle, Democrats, progressives, liberals are going to have a tough cycle, right? Federal government is moving slow. It moves slow. People show up, and we feel like sometimes the things that we organize over the reasons we came out to vote are always pushed to the back burner, even when we have majorities. So we need these things like this that are people centered, that are grassroots, to really start to rev up the nation, right? To really start to get our leaders in line, right? So they recognize who they're really working for and who they're really fighting for. And I think that this is what that means. And this is what this moment is doing.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad you talked about the things that you're getting excited about, because of course, our question that we always end it with is, what brings you joy? But before we get to that, can you just talk to people, let them know how they can get in contact with you, how they can find out more information about your campaign?
Yes. Folks, we are on all social media platforms. You can hit me up on Summer for PA on Twitter, Summer Lee for Congress, I think, and Instagram, Facebook. My website is summerforpa.com. You can get connected. We are out in these streets knocking all of the 12th, from the city of Pittsburgh to the southern suburbs, all the way out to Westmoreland County. So please join in with us. It's a movement. It is a coalition. It's multiracial. It's multi-generational. It's positive. And I believe that it is the movement that we need to really turn over this region and change the political landscape into the future of this region.
Thank you so much. And is there anything else that's bringing you joy, keeping you motivated, making you happy as you do this campaign season?
My stories give me joy. Miracle, you give me joy. Joy. You know what? That's the saddest thing. It's like, what gives you joy? And I'm like, I'm so depressed because I'm running a campaign, and campaigns are hard. What give me time gives me joy. I like to just be with my family. I like to chill. I like to listen to music. I like to eat good food. All of that like sparks joy from me. But I need to find more things that sparks joy from me too.
I'm gonna say our earrings matching is sparking joy for me, because we did not plan this, y'all. I
Didn't
know
even see
y'all
it until you just
listen.
mentioned it.
I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Look at the universe. But thank you so much to you, Summer, for taking time out to join us for the Sunday Night Sit Down. And if you're wondering, like, what's going on with the 12th, I need to know who's running. Don't worry, because tomorrow we are going to be having our first candidate forum. You can hear more from Summer, Steve Irwin, and Jerry Dickinson to talk about why they're all running for the congressional on the 12th. There may be other candidates coming on, but people have not announced as of yet. So those are the people we have invited, the people who have registered and who are running. So we hope to see you right here tomorrow as we have this forum. But thank you so much, Summer, for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
You too. I enjoy being with y'all. I always love chopping it up with one hood.
We try. And again, it is politics. It is political season. You need to make sure you are registered to vote. As of yet, we're still waiting on the legislative maps. At the top of the hour, we talked about the congressional maps and the redistricting process. We are still waiting on the legislative maps to navigate through the court systems. And so when we get those maps, we'll be reaching out to those individuals for our forums as well. But for those of you who are in the legislative 19th and 24th districts, don't forget your first election is going to be on April 5th, and then your second election will be on May 17th. So please make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you are staying up to date. Follow, us out here at One Hood Power. Subscribe to our YouTube over at One Hood Power so you can get the latest and greatest information. We are committed to making sure you understand what's on the ballot, who's on your ballot, and asking the questions that are important to you. So please make sure you stay tuned. Again, our congressional forum for the 12th district is going to be tomorrow. So make sure you tune in right here on One Hood Power. And with that, I'm your host, Miracle Jones, bidding you a good night. Have a great evening.